Hey everybody, this is Off Leash with Erik Prince. I'm Mark Serrano. China has been running war games all around Taiwan for weeks. And in fact, Erik, this has been a tactic of theirs for years and years. But what's different now, at least on the face of it, is there's a new leader in Taiwan, William Lai Ching-te, took office 2 weeks ago, May 20th. And these war games started, I think, even before he took office. Interestingly, we've got a new defense minister in China. His name is Dong Jun. Spoke at a conference in Singapore just the other day. We'll get into that. And then, of course, Taiwan, for its purpose, is also doing drills. So it seems like a lot of war games have gone on through the years. You warned us, you told us in Off Leash months ago that spring of 2024 might be different. Tell us why and how.
They're behaving almost like a boa constrictor, where they continue to press closer and closer to the target, squeezing, and it seems now quite clear that if they're going to do something in Taiwan, they're going to do a full-on blockade, because that's what they've been exercising. They started first by shooting missiles over Taiwan, even landing it in Japanese territorial waters. But now with the maritime blockade, with the aircraft overflights, I think their next move would be to just encircle it fully, lock it down, and see what the U.S. response is. And are we going to have the stomach to send ships into that level of blockade to challenge them? And the new defense minister, the new PLA defense minister, said, we're basically going to crush these breakaway republics and break them into pieces.
He said, whoever dares to split Taiwan from China will be crushed to pieces and invite their destruction.
Certain clarity.
Very clear.
Well, if only our own SecDef could speak with that kind of clarity.
Right. Yeah, it's rare, quite rare. But this is really fascinating, though. So one of the things they are testing for, as you just indicated, is American resolve, right? How strongly will America defend our, erstwhile ally of Taiwan? And so I assume strategically that's why a blockade would come way before some sort of invasion, correct?
I think it could either be a lightning strike with a special operations type raid, whether it's airborne or helicopter assault, into Taiwan to see if they can topple the government, and then immediately surround it and isolate it so that no help can go onto the Taiwanese land, and really see what the resolve of the West is. Are you going to risk aircraft carriers and ships and all the rest, and so that it's in kind of Sun Tzu parlance, make the fight over before it really even starts.
So visuals always tell a great story. Let's go to the map.
Okay.
So you can sort of walk us through what's been happening in the region. It seems like it's happened fairly quickly, only in the last several weeks. And you've been echoing in my mind your warning to us months ago about this happening.
So Xiamen is the city on the Chinese mainland that's closest to the island of Formosa, Taiwan over here. But you can see Kinmen County, that used to be the islands of Quemoy and Matsu. Back in the 50s, there was actually artillery duels between that, because that's still held by Taiwan. So that, and I'm told there's even U.S. Special Forces advisors on that island, literally as close as 3 or 4 miles from the Chinese mainland. So one of the easiest places for China to move is to take that. Really impossible to try to resupply, rearm, medevac anyone that's there. You can see the red boxes. Those are basically maritime task forces of PLA Navy vessels practicing encircling a full-on blockade to prevent any kind of vessel from getting to Taiwan.
So that would just basically cut Taiwan off from the rest of the world.
Yes. And they would cut telecom, they would cut energy supplies, all the rest, to literally lay siege to it. And you can see up along, again, there's Kinmen now, and other islands up farther up the coast that are still technically belong to Taiwan. And you can see over here, you have Japanese islands already. So you have some pretty close distances. The the distances across the Straits of Formosa from the island of Taiwan to the Chinese mainland is only about 65 miles. That's less than the distance of the width of Lake Michigan between Michigan and Illinois.
Right.
It's not much.
Mm-hmm. Why wouldn't the Chinese have taken Kinmen County a long time ago?
Because they were afraid of what military response or what sanction type response would be. But again, as I've said, the Chinese, when you look at Xi's speeches over the last 2-3 years, he says, prepare for great conflict, for stormy waters ahead. And they've been making all kinds of moves with their economy to make it not susceptible to the kind of sanctions that the U.S. would try to do. So they're showing their hand, they're practicing, they're exercising the muscle, and I don't care how mighty the U.S. Navy is. This is only 65 miles off the coast of China. So the U.S. Navy has to win perfectly everywhere to maintain dominance. The PLA only has to win right here, literally off their coast. And so not only do you have those vessels, but you have tens of thousands of precision missiles staged on the shore, whether it's cruise missiles, anti-ship type drones, and of course ballistic missiles that can now even hit a maneuvering, moving target like an aircraft carrier.
So these ships are in the waters now.
Yes.
They're circling.
Yeah, these images were taken about a week ago,
Mm-hmm.
and show very current Chinese naval exercises. And this is on top of armadas of aircraft that routinely fly in from the Chinese mainland and perforate Taiwanese territorial airspace.
It's just testing, just constantly
Just probing
testing.
and testing.
So I understand the Taiwanese have conducted their own drills. So, even after the warning from Dong Jun, the new defense minister of China, the Stark warning, it sounds as if Taiwan is conducting their own drills.
Yeah,
how do they
I'm
do
sure they're
that
gonna have,
with this?
I'm sure. Well, I'm
this
sure they're
picture?
going to continue to have drills, but the problem is, and what we've seen in warfare in Ukraine and off the coast of the Middle East now, precision weapons are everywhere, and so any known location on Taiwan that has a bunker, an aircraft shelter, command and control, anything like that has been pre-registered, pre-zeroed for multiple Chinese-made precision missiles to smash it. So again, the best way to deter an all-out assault is to give the vagary of time for how people could hold out. Taiwan should be building a home guard. They should be spending that time exercising, democratizing the ability to resist, force for their people. You only need 2 or 3% of the population that is armed, capable, and willing to defend to make Taiwan exceedingly difficult target for a rapid seizure by PLA forces.
So that goes against sort of a pedestrian's logic. Only 2 to 4% of the population need to be properly armed and trained to help resist an assault from China.
Think about the American Revolution. We had 30% that were loyalists, pro-crown, 40% in the middle that were just trying to survive, and 30% that were pro-liberty, pro-independence of America, of the colonies. And there was only 10% of that 30%, 3%, that actually took up arms and fought the British Army. So again, there's 24 million people in Taiwan, 3% of that, 720,000. I think the Taiwanese armed forces total are 150,000. So you're talking about almost 5 times that amount. That all they have to do is step outside their home. If they have a local cache at the civil defense bunker, fire department, police station, and you find your equivalent of Boy Scout leaders, other reservists, your active CrossFitters, your volunteer firemen, those kind of people that'll turn up when things get ugly, to make Taiwan much more secure by making it a much less of a certainty, much less of a laydown for the PLA to come rolling in there.
So that would be a force multiplier for the uniform
and
military.
Very, very cheap and impossible to target all those cache locations and storage. So as you look at Taiwan, you have Taipei at the north, capital city, the whole west coast of Taiwan, that's the flat area, and that is where all the chip fabs that make whether it's the phone you're watching this on, the chips in your car, everything, those come from the fabs on the west side. The east side of Taiwan is exceedingly rugged, and right across the middle, those mountains get to almost 12,000 feet. So it's a very, very rugged terrain, but all of which faces all those missiles, artillery, rocket forces that the Chinese PLA can point at it. You also notice how close Japan's aerospace and territorial waters are. The other variable that the PLA must respect is the Japanese self-defense forces. They have woken up to the threat. They are spending significantly more on defense. And historically, over the millennia, the Chinese have always taken a pounding from the Japanese if they go to war with them. So that is something that still is a factor, and you can see how close Japanese waters are and how much it matters to Japan.
So Japan's a major stakeholder in this picture. And so if there's peace or war, they're going to have a direct involvement.
Yes. And I think it's, they just announced the new flagship of their fleet again at a recent exercise, and it was the Kaga, which is also the flagship of when they attacked Pearl Harbor. So they have definitely awoken the land of the rising sun, and it's probably good for Japan to be a bit more upright and stiff in the neck now, because it means that we don't have to be. This is their area. This is their waters. It's let them take a greater share of the burden.
So here we are, June 2024. We've had war raging between Ukraine and Russia for well over 2 years now. Many of us believe that never would have happened, but for the fecklessness and the weakness of Joe Biden pro-Afghanistan, the botched Afghanistan withdrawal. Similar dynamics here. You had said months ago, you didn't make a prediction, but you had said months ago, if there was a time, this spring was the time for China to act. So 2 questions for you on that. One is, I want to get your crystal ball out here. What are the considerations for China at the moment? And secondly, what on earth should or is the Biden administration likely doing right now to stave off a conflict?
Well, just like we're approaching the 80th anniversary of Normandy, June 6th, it was originally scheduled for June 4. And why? The convergence of weather and tide to do amphibious operation, which is very, very difficult. There are no great amphibious over the beaches in Taiwan, so it's a hard nut for any force to crack to do an amphibious operation onto Taiwan, but it's impossible or much more difficult to do if you have big winds in the straits. So why did I say if they're going to do it, it'll be this spring? Because now in the Taiwan Straits, the wind has started to lie down, and it's a lot more calm. The main port of Taiwan is up in the northeast, and it's significantly dominated by organized crime, which is quite beholden to the PLA and the CCP. So they could even do something in September or before our election by some kind of a seizure of that port and then a follow-on invasion. But I don't know what the Biden administration is doing other than hoping, because I think the sad thing is the U.S. weapons have proven to be quite susceptible to jamming. They're in less high demand by the Ukrainians because a lot of the stuff doesn't work, whether it's HIMARS missing a lot of targets. If it's jammed, the Excalibur GPS guided artillery shells, wonderful in theory, but if they're missing their target because of GPS spoofing, not very useful. The $300,000 controller launch unit shooting a $200,000 Javelin missile at a tank versus the Ukrainian missile, which I think cost $29,000 a piece. So the U.S. has shown that a lot of our kung fu is not as good as long as the defense lobbyists said it was. And at the same time, the Russians see how tapped out and overpriced our defense base is. At the same time, the Chinese and the North Koreans are definitely helping Russia with energetics, munitions, etc., all being shipped across the railway from the east. And so the U.S. is pretty much tapped out. And when you have now for the last 6 months, the Navy shooting $2 million missiles to knock down $50,000 drones launched by the Houthis off of Yemen, we're not in a position of better deterrence. It's not that the U.S. military equipment has performed so spectacularly that everyone's afraid of it and in awe of it. It's the fear factor has definitely diminished, so it increases the chances of the PLA doing something over the next months yet.
Does China fear a new Trump administration?
I can say that they definitely respected the hell out of a Trump administration last time. The trade policies, the very real trade policies that were implemented definitely put the Chinese on their back heels, and even a lot of the controls over technology going to China for a lot of their specific manufacturing that they wanted to do. I would say unequivocally that the Chinese would want a continuation of the Biden administration because they are so weak and predictable.
If the Chinese leadership becomes convinced that Donald Trump will win in November, what are the odds that they're going to go ahead and make a move?
It is the absolute stated goal of the CCP to subsume, to take all of Taiwan. So then I would put the chance of them doing something quite high.
But and this, they may perceive this as the best window they've had in decades to take some sort of action. And yes, because their military has continued to grow and build. They have been building hundreds and hundreds of ships, thousands of aircraft. And our defense base is just slow and behind and way overpriced. But that's the other dynamic here is, 10, 20, 30 years ago, they were not in the same position militarily.
No.
So that's the other thing. So this sort of perfect storm is coming together for them.
And again, they don't have to be superior to the U.S. military. They just have to be superior to the U.S. military right there. That's it. The U.S. military has to be superior, or a perception of all over the globe.
Everywhere.
They just have to be superior in those waters.
So let's exit on this. You already sort of outlined and touched on this, but I want to get into it a little bit more. The options for China moving forward. You talked about a blockade. You talked about some sort of strategic strike.
I would say
in the mainland.
First, some kind of an incident that gets stimulated on one of those very close coastal islands, Quemoy Matsu, now Kinmen. 2, a blockade with an aerial overflight, and they just say, effective immediately. There's no more commercial traffic in or out of Taiwan because this is all China and we're claiming it, and F off. That is, in my mind, increasingly likely, especially before an election if they think Trump is going to win.
Extraordinary. And Europe seems feckless.
Europe is tapped
Biden
out and trying to figure out how to wake up and even do their part for their goal of defending Ukraine. So all those allies are 0.0 help to us out here.
Right. So really, the only real player, based on what you've outlined for us thus far, that could have an influence is Japan.
Correct.
With great incentive.
Yes, and as much as Korea would also be affected by that adversely if they do something to Taiwan, the visceral enmity between South Korea and Japan is still very, very hot, and North Korea, you can guarantee, will be coordinated with China to keep as much of the Korean forces fixed because they'll be threatening a great escalation in Korea. So it's a very, very dicey situation, and I am not convinced that the Pacific Fleet is ready to do what it needs to do in the event the order comes from the president.
How do you break through a blockade, a Chinese blockade of Taiwan?
If we talk about the first island chain is what the U.S. tries to do to contain, like the submarine fleet of the PLA. They're really trying to break through that, and breaking through Taiwan and pushing out into this open sea also becomes a strategic threat for the United States, because when their missile submarines, their boomers, can push out in an area where it's much tougher for the U.S. Navy to track them and to locate them, now it becomes a greater threat even to the west coast of the United States.
And one of the more concerning things you've mentioned is, if I get this right, gangs in Taiwan.
Yes.
Sounds like a guerrilla force for mainland China. Is that the way to describe it?
When you go through the Taiwanese countryside, there'll be some places that are flying a CCP red China flag because there's some segment of population that is that pro-China, pro-mainland. They're happy to be part of the communist program. Unfortunately, almost like you see in the United States.
So your best advice today to Taiwan would be
home guard, home guard, home guard.
So arm the citizenry.
It's kind of antithetical to how they operate because it's a very elitist, top-down society. What we take for granted with a Second Amendment with an armed citizen makes a totalitarian takeover that much more difficult to contemplate. That's why the Japanese never really considered invading the United States, because they'd run into 140, 150 million people on the West Coast that were gunned up and would say, not today. So again, a small percent of the population, 2-3%, that had arms, some small drones, some access to IED, explosive form penetrator, very, very basic stuff. $1 billion spent well would negate hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars in an unnecessary war.
Well, if you look at the geography, as you've shown us, considering that their population and economic centers are right in the crosshairs of mainland China on the west coast.
But if you're going to do an invasion, the invader finds himself immediately in an urban jungle. And so your ability for armed citizens in some kind of a home guard program could make that exceedingly unpleasant for an invading force.
Amazing. Look, you have just sat in a master class on the potential conflict brewing between China and Taiwan from Erik. This has been fascinating. We're going to be talking a lot more about this as tensions continue to boil here on Off Leash. Don't forget, check our sponsor. Go to unplugged.com/off-leash to check out our sponsor, the Unplugged Phone. It's available today for you to purchase. Check it out.
Order today.
Yeah.
Should have it within 2 days.
That's amazing. Jeff Bezos can't even, produce a phone like that quickly. Check it out, unplugged.com/off-leash. Until next time, this is Off Leash with Erik Prince. I'm Mark Serrano. Join us again next time. Thanks.